Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's lovely to be back in the fantastic little museum here, and long may it rain. It's a lovely venue for everybody, both for people giving talks and I think for everybody attending. I was just thinking when I was walking along Stephen's Green just a few moments ago, it was almost the weather for Margaret Burke Sheridan. This was her haunt towards the end of her life, in her rather long and dismal retirement here in Dublin after the heights she had soared to in Italy. And people I interviewed for the book in 1989, as you know, I was a child writer, talked to me about meeting her like a ray of sunshine on a sunny day. So I said how appropriate it is that we're here tonight, Trevor, to speak about her. This is her anniversary. She was born in 1958, she died in 1958, and she was born in 1889. So next year, Castlebar, I hope, will rise to the occasion, as Dublin has, and celebrate her birth in Castlebar. Little Maggie Sheridan, daughter of John Burke Sheridan, Esquire, a most interesting and intelligent child, sang in a very pleasing manner Coming Through the Rye and received great applause. So ran the very first public review in 1897 of the future prima donna, then aged 9, in a school concert in her hometown in Castlebar. Now, her family background is very, very interesting. I'm from Castlebar myself, and my father was a great fan of Margaret Burke Sheridan, so when we were listening to the Beatles, he'd raise his eyes and say, why can't you listen to your next-door neighbour, Margaret Burke Sheridan? So our eyes were raised in unison at that. Nobody knew a lot about her, and I certainly didn't, because Sheridan told a lot of little lies throughout her life for various reasons, and one of them was that not only was she an orphan, but she was an only child as well. But it is an onus on a biographer to go digging, and when I went digging, I found, in fact, she had 3 brothers and 1 sister, and she was the youngest of the family. The Sheridan family in Castlebar were very well connected. They were of a minor landed gentry family and had a small estate, Pheasant Hill, outside Castlebar. They were also connected to the Martins of Ballinahinch, and indeed there was one marriage into the Earls of Lucan, who were, of course, the landlords of the town of Castlebar. Her grandfather, John Martin Sheridan, was a great Parnellite, and he actually went bankrupt and died as a bankrupt in, appropriately enough, some things never change, the Isle of Man. Her mother's family came from a building background, and they owned much property in the town of Castlebar, so a very well-connected family, but sadly had fallen a little bit down the social scale. Her father became the postmaster in Castlebar, and Margaret Burke Sheridan went to the same school as I did myself, St. Angela's National Mercy School in Castlebar. Her family is buried in the family grave in Castlebar. But her early life had its share of misfortune, acrimony and loss. And I think that fact impacted so many ways, as it does on most people, in shaping both her character and her future life. And if I may say also, infiltrated that wonderful, wonderful tone that she brought to her operatic material. A family disagreement, some drink problems, resulted in the estrangement of that family and her removal from Castlebar on the death of her father in 1901. Her mother had died previously, so she was indeed an orphan. Now, she was sent to Eccles Street because the family home, her older siblings had all gone away. She was left in the care of a local clergyman, and his sister was actually in Eccles Street, so that's how Margaret Burke Sheridan came to be a boarder in Eccles Street. The convent in Eccles Street was destined to become her substitute home until she was almost 20 years old. The desperate sense of abandonment and loneliness she experienced there as a child, when other children would go home for Christmas, summer holidays, Easter holidays, Margaret Burke Sheridan literally had nowhere to go unless a comrade or a fellow school pupil, their family may take pity on her and bring her away for a weekend. So when she said to a friend in later life, "There's no place like home when you haven't got one," That was her way of putting it all together. Indeed, when she left the town of Castlebar, she never again knew a home of her own. She lived from patron to patron and from hotel room to hotel room, the last being a patron here in the Shelburne Hotel before her removal to St. Vincent's Nursing Home. But her mischievous sense of humour, which was to see her through so many disappointments in her life, ensured her popularity at school. And at Eccles Street, her singing voice was coached by a very perceptive music teacher, Mother Clement, and later by Dr. Vincent O'Brien, whom you possibly know was also the teacher for both John McCormick and James Joyce. Vincent O'Brien chose Margaret Burke Sheridan for a public performance of The Messiah in the Gaiety Theatre in 1906. In 1908, she took part in the Feis Ceoil, and significantly, she won the gold medal as a mezzo-soprano, not a soprano, as a mezzo, singing Handel's Hushy Verdant Plains and the Irish air by Avon's Tide. Lady Palmer from beautiful Kenure House, now sadly a ruin, in North County Dublin, with Mayo connections who knew Sheridan's family, raised a subscription concert for Margaret Burke Sheridan to enable her to study at the Royal Academy of Music in London, where she spent 2 further years and did extremely well there. Her ambition all through her life, even from her childhood in Eccles Street, was to sing in opera. Opera held a strange fascination for her. But her ambition to sing was interrupted by World War I, which really the outlets in London for opera were very few and far between. Her family's political connections in the west of Ireland got her the attention of the Irish members of the old Irish Parliamentary Party. Remember, Ireland was part of the British Empire at this time. And especially the influential father of the House of Commons, T.P. O'Connor, who was formerly from Athlone and knew Margaret Burke Sheridan's family. Indeed, she was a great mimic, and she used to put on a broad West of Ireland accent and call him T.P. O'Connor. In later years, T.P. tried to steer her career along more lucrative paths, but without much success. But through him, she was invited to sing at these fabulous soirees and dinner parties in the Belgravia and Mayfair mansions of the wealthy and aristocratic. This is the great Edwardian society now before World War I. Smashed it all into smithereens. And she said to a friend, I found her letter, she said, I'm singing at a big party at the Duchess of Marlborough's next week. Pray for me. Her innate sense of style, fun and adaptability made her a favourite with these London high society hostesses, but her desire to sing in grand opera still persevered. One evening, as she finished a recital in Seaford House, the home of her patron and friend, Lady Howard de Walden, a dark-haired man rushed over to her saying, "Yours is the voice I've been waiting all my life to hear." And it was none other than the pioneer inventor himself, Marconi. And when you have a moment, I brought some artefacts from her collection, which I have in my attic, sadly, at home. And you will see some artefacts there from Marconi, a very important man in Margaret Burke Sheridan's life. In the middle of World War I, he agreed to bring her to Italy, where she might really realise her dream. And she always talked about coming out from a tunnel through the Alps, and the beautiful blue sky of Italy just hit her. And when he got off at the station in Milan, thousands of people were there to greet Marconi, who was really the man of the moment for both sides in the war, and he was greeted like a hero. And he turned to Margaret Burke Sheridan, or Peggy as we call her now, Peggy Sheridan, and said, "It's nice to be famous, Margarita, someday you must be famous too." So it was a lovely introduction to an Italy that she loved dearly. But in Rome, she found with Marconi that she had only exchanged one gilded cage for another from London. And she persuaded him to bring her to an eminent operatic coach called Martino. And indeed, I stood in Martino's very offices when I was doing research for the book, and I was trying to imagine this young girl in 1917 Rome, going along with this famous man to be assessed by this famous operatic coach. Martino demanded that she abandon her society friends like Marconi, that she revert again to become a student, and he set about raising her voice from mezzo to soprano, because simply the best parts, of course, are always available for the soprani. But before he could complete the process, fate intervened once more. I often thought if I wasn't writing a biography and I wrote a novel on Margaret Burke Sheridan, I would be accused of the highest melodramatic nonsense, but thankfully it is fairly accurate. She had moved herself to a small room in the Coronale Hotel on the Via Nazionale, and her balcony, her small little balcony, which indeed I stood on myself as well, overlooked the back of the Rome, the famous Rome opera, which was then called the Costanzi Opera. Practicing her scales and singing her arias, either by accident or maybe on purpose, within earshot of the director, the famous Emma Corelli. Indeed, a woman was a director. We're looking around at all the famous Irish women. Imagine it was a woman director of the Costanzi in 1918, which was something to say and to boast about. Peggy finally got her chance. Much to her teacher Martino's dismay, on the 3rd of February 1918, she made a dramatic operatic entrance when Corelli chose her to replace an indisposed soprano as Mimi in La Bohème. And Sheridan talks herself about the 4 days of intense practice that Corelli actually put her through to get her on the stage of the Costanzi. It was a huge risk. The Roman audience rose to applaud, and I quote, "A young artist blessed with a wonderful voice who gave an unforgettable performance. Peggy Sheridan, prima donna, was finally on her way." After a successful debut in Rome, Peggy moved on to Milan, which was to be her home for the next 14 years. La Scala, the Mecca for opera, was closed. Instead, she performed her Mimi at Milan's second theatre, the Dal Verme, before the critical Milanese opera public. And now we have to consider the time here. This is fascist Italy. This is the Italy of Mussolini, when to be good at anything you had to be Italian. They didn't like foreigners. The newspapers tried to put an Italian gloss on the success of this foreigner, and they said, "Miss Sheridan is Irish, but either by look or by instinct, she sings as an Italian." So that got over that. After her success as Mimi, she convinced her impresario that she was now ready to take on the prestigious role of Butterfly, hitherto the preserve of Italian soprani. La Sheridan, as she became known, brought a different and new interpretation to this famous role, the critics reported, and the audiences in Milan flocked to hear her. Drawn by the reviews and by the reports from his own son of this foreign Butterfly, Puccini too came to hear for himself and was impressed. And he told her, "It's an interpretation that is completely new to me. It is yours, not mine, but there is not a dry eye in the house." An invitation to bring her interpretation of Butterfly to the San Carlo sent her into the operatic cauldron that was Naples. Interpretation was her great forte, and it held her audiences enthralled from the moment of her Butterfly entrance. A fellow compatriot, the baritone Walter McNally, was in the audience for her opening night in Naples, and he wrote, "I shall never forget her Madama Butterfly. It was thrilling to be in the audience and hear a great host of people standing up on the seats shouting, 'Brava, brava, Sheridan, Sheridan.' To commemorate her triumph, the directors of the San Carlo presented her with a bronze bust by the famous Italian sculptor Gemito. The sculpture bears the inscription, 'A Margherita Sheridan, Butterfly in super abile.' I have to say I had a little hand in bringing this back from Italy, because on her death it was inadvertently taken back to Italy, and in the meantime Gemito had become a very, very famous sculptor, so the Italian government didn't like works of Italian art to leave the country. So I can tell you a Dunnes Stores bag did a lot of things for us. coming home on the plane that evening. And this little statue is very sadly and very badly placed in the National Concert Hall in a place where few people can see it. And I've asked on numerous occasions that it would be put beside her portrait where everybody can see it. It's actually, as you go up the main stairway, it's on the left-hand side and you would hardly even notice it. Now Puccini entered her life. He resolved to coach her personally for the role in Manon and Manon Lescaut, the opera he told her he was most proud of. For her debut in the role at the prestigious Carnivale season at Rimini, Puccini sent her a magnificent gown of blue silk and lace to wear in Act 2. There's a photograph of her there in the little collection I brought with me. The reviews described her performance as being magnificent. It was at Rimini too that she gave the first of her many performances as Madeleine in André Chenier, singing with the new upcoming star of the age, the famous Gigli. From Rimini she went on to Cento, a very prestigious place in the opera circuit in Italy, where Puccini himself came to hear her Manon, and afterwards they drove in triumph through the little town in an open carriage. After Puccini's death in 1924, Peggy was inundated with offers to sing in the numerous commemorative performances held throughout Italy, from Naples to Trieste. Peggy was an unparalleled interpreter of the music of Puccini, the famous conductor Vincenzo Bellezza remarked, and he conducted her many times. The humanity of his characters and the lyricism of his music found a subtle echo in her, and thereby lived. Dublin too had sent out the call for her to return, and after an absence of 10 years in November 1922, in the middle of the Civil War, against a background of killings, executions, reprisals and hunger strikes, Peggy was to give the only 2 performances of her career in her native country. Staying with the nuns at Eccles Street, reporters besieged the convent to interview Ireland's most famous daughter. And for a brief time, the sound of gunfire faded. Political differences were put aside as on the stage of the Theatre Royal, accompanied by Dr. Vincent O'Brien, the Dublin audiences heard La Sheridan for themselves as she sang some operatic arias and a selection from Moore's melodies. In 1922, following public protest and great press agitation, the long-awaited reopening of La Scala and the appointment of the authoritarian conductor Arturo Toscanini as its director was announced with great fanfare. Toscanini set about reforming all aspects of opera at the Great Opera House, as well as assembling a galaxy of stars to perform there. Among them was the only foreigner, Margaret Sheridan. But Peggy was not the first Irishwoman, as you possibly know, to tread the stage of the fabled theatre. In 1846, the Limerick-born soprano Catherine Hayes, referred to as the Irish Nightingale, enjoyed great success there too. Toscanini had revolutionised the whole art of opera, Peggy later recalled. He realised that the days of the old singer were over. Perfect though her singing might be, unless the lines of her figure were harmonious as well, he refused to have old women with 3 chins and 4 tummies singing about their fatal beauty. In future, he decided, Manon must look like Manon. Toscanini chose Peggy for the prestigious title role for the commemorative revival of La Vallée. That was written, of course, by his friend Catalani. On the 6th of April 1922, as the lights in the Great Theatre dimmed, Peggy Sheridan took the stage in the demanding role, earning spontaneous applause for her arias, much to the displeasure of Toscanini, who frowned on such outbursts. For the next 5 years, she was a regular at La Scala, making operatic history in a world premiere of Belphegor in 1923, as Madeleine in André Chenier, and as Anna Maria Nico Panacci by Riccitelli. She also represented La Scala both at Monte Carlo and at Covent Garden. Her relationship with Toscanini, however, was fraught. her outspokenness, her refusal to accept his dictatorial and indeed at times demeaning treatment, as well as her inclination for partying, resulted in many heated exchanges between them. She referred to him as the whip. He called her the Empress of Ireland. When she made herself unavailable for the role of Dolly in a production of Wolf Ferrari's Sly, she did not appear again at La Scala. But she is remembered there as one of Toscanini's stars, and especially for her magnificent duets with the Italian tenor Aureliano Partile. In 1919, Peggy made her first of many appearances on the stage of the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. This was the first season after the ending of World War I, and her English society and political friends from her past absolutely flocked to hear her. She was chosen to replace the ageing but legendary Dame Nellie Melba, and that was a tough task for anybody, as Mimi in La Boheme. It was a daunting debut. She represents the ideal Mimi, the Daily Chronicle reported, and even Dame Nellie seemed to approve of her replacement. She came on stage at Covent Garden and presented Peggy with a fan in tribute for her interpretation of Mimi as the new Mimi now that she was retiring. And it is interesting to note in 1956 at the Dublin Grand Opera Society here, when the Romanian soprano Virginia Ziani was performing a La Traviata, Sheridan in her box descended and presented the Melba fan to Virginia Ziani. And I interviewed Virginia Ziani for the book. And she told me that she was looking now for a young singer to hand on that fan. So it's a lovely connection, Melba, Sheridan, Ziani, and whoever has it now. So it's a lovely little story in its own right. From 1925 until 1930, Peggy represented La Scala at the annual international seasons at Covent Garden and became one of the Royal Opera House favourites. Among her collection are hundreds of fan letters saying, "We love your smiles." I think all the other sopranos maybe were getting a bit beyond themselves and they were ignoring the people who were queuing for tickets all along Covent Garden, but Sheridan would engage with them and they loved her for that. She created the title role of the difficult Mascagni opera Iris and sang also in Bohème, Butterfly, André Chenier, Gianni Schicchi, Manon Lescaut, and her final performance was in Othello. She also sang Lou in Turandot with the great Eva Turner, whom I also interviewed for the book, who remembered her with affection for her lovely voice and warm and witty personality. Geely, too, chose her for his Covent Garden debut in Chenier. Her final performance, as I said, was in 1930 in the role of Desdemona in Othello. But Covent Garden meant an awful lot more to Margaret Burke Sheridan. For among her letters are the letters relating to her, and I'll say it wisely, her friendship, the romantic entanglement with Colonel Eustace Blois, who was managing director of Covent Garden. And it was a very traumatic affair, in inverted commas, for a woman who had been reared in a convent until she was 22, who was very Catholic in her outlook. He was married and for some reason or not couldn't or wouldn't become divorced. He referred to her in the letters as Paddy Darling, and the letters in themselves would make a really beautiful memoir or book. But there's a great sadness in this, and there's a great sense of loneliness and not being able to really leave her past behind her in terms of who she was and that rearing that she had as a child, and later on in Eccles Street. There is one unsent letter to him saying, how could she, Margaret Burke Sheridan from Ireland, become the lover of a married man? You know, it is all so dramatic. It's like something Puccini would write for one of his heroines, and her life was almost replicating that. Peggy also introduced many of her Italian colleagues, including the great Toti del Monte, to London because with her connection with Eustace Blois, he went every year to look for artists to appear at the Covent Garden season, and Sheridan directed him in to various people and introduced him to various people. And Eva Turner told me too how Peggy had paved the way for other non-Italian singers, including Turner herself, to sing in Italy. Each year, Sheridan's performances were eagerly awaited at the Garden, and she was feted and treated like a star in London. King George V rarely missed her performance of La Bohème, which was his own favourite. And after one such performance, he asked to meet her. On being presented, the king asked her how come an English girl had achieved such fluency in Italian and such success at La Scala. And I told him, Peggy recalled, it was probably because I was Irish. Many of her performances were transmitted live from the stage of Covent Garden by the BBC, and also while she was in London during these times, she made many memorable recordings, as you possibly know, with her recording company HMV. Now, her retirement from the operatic stage was as dramatic as her debut. Her vocal technique, remember, go back to the Feshkiol here in Dublin, mezzo-soprano. Martino had not finished with her raising that voice and putting it on a secure foundation. Her vocal technique, which had never been fully developed, faltered. An operation on her vocal cords in 1932 had to be repeated the following year. The breakdown of her friendship with Colonel Eustace Blois and his subsequent death in 1933 all combined to make her lose confidence in her voice. Friends in Italy and London all rallied round with advice and encouragement. Suggestions that she sing on the concert platform brought her retort. How can I sing without my cloak? She had no courage to do that. The cloak being the confidence and support she got from singing with colleagues, chorus, orchestra, the sets, the beautiful costumes, all the trappings of the operatic stage was really a crutch for her. She couldn't, like McCormick, stand on the concert platform and sing cold with the piano. Among her operatic memorabilia, I have so many offers from so many touring companies to ask her to sing like McCormick. McCormick's own manager went after her and said, I'll look after you. Come to America, for thousands of your own countrymen will make you a queen as they have made McCormick a king. But she could not bring herself to do that. From Milan to London to Vienna, where funded by her friends in London, she sought professional help for bruised vocal cords. But it was not to be. And as the clouds of World War II descended on Europe once again, friends in Ireland advised her to come home to the safety of Ireland. There followed a long and aimless retirement in Dublin, where, as one acquaintance said, she became an alien among her own, outrageous and witty. Cultured, intelligent, a brilliant linguist, witty and outspoken, she could also be irritable and short-tempered. But behind the facade of the once famous prima donna she presented was a deep-seated sense of impermanency and loss. She wrote to a friend, "Loneliness, I've almost died of it." She did make one return to Castlebar. She was invited to stay and pay at the Renville House Hotel, which was run by Gogarty, but you had to be invited to stay, but you did pay as well. And she went there for a few summers. And she talked about getting off the train in Galway and getting on the Connemara bus. And you can imagine this with her. She dressed very exotically. She looked exotic with her blonde hair, her blue eyes, her stage makeup. Everything was the same as if she was still acting in opera. And you can imagine this exotic figure among all the ducks and geese and everything else that was on that bus jogging along through Connemara. And this gaunt farmer from Connemara sat down and they got talking, and she was always, don't forget, she was still from the west of Ireland. You can hear it in her speaking voice, that little west of Ireland tinge. And they got talking anyway, and he had heard about her all right. And then he took one look at her and he said, "'Tis a wonder you never got married to Miss Sheridan. You must have had great chances in your day." Now, she was only 40 at this stage, so I'm sure, but she told that story often herself. Castlebar came a-calling to Renville House, and there was then a trend around the country to raise funds for various things by having a monster carnival. So a monster carnival was being organised in Castlebar, and the committee decided that wouldn't it be fantastic to have their very famous daughter come back on the stage of the local cinema, and what La Scala couldn't get, Castlebar could get. So she misinterpreted what was being offered, and she thought she was coming back to be acclaimed by her town's people. And when she arrived in Castlebar and she was told she was expected to perform that evening on the stage of the local cinema, all hell broke loose anyway, and she went off in high dudgeon back to Connemara. But however, the local county manager showed me a lovely little postcard she had sent to him afterwards when he apologised on behalf of the committee and everything was sorted out, and she said she'd like to return again to Castlebar, and she wrote, "When it's moonlight in Mayo." So there you are. Release from her humdrum existence came out of the blue in 1952 when she was appointed patron of a New York-based arts foundation. From then she divided her time between Ireland and New York, and perhaps regretted that she had not taken the advice of her old mentor T.P., who at the height of her career had advised her to leave Italy and accept the offers she had received both from the Metropolitan Opera in New York and the Chicago Opera. In 1956, Peggy was diagnosed with cancer. For somebody who was afraid to really chance her arm singing now, she bore her illness with the greatest of courage, never losing her sense of style and humour to the very end. She knew she was dying, made her funeral arrangements while keeping up an outward show of gaiety. Regarding her final resting place in Glasnevin Cemetery, Sir Cusick told me that she said to him, "I'll be tippy-toes with Dev's secretary, Kathleen O'Connell, her friend who had passed away a few months beforehand. And if you do go to Glasnevin, go right through. De Valera's tomb is on one side and Margaret Burke Sheridan is there, right tippy-toes with Dev's secretary, Kathleen O'Connell." Clutching her mother's prayer book from those distant days in Castlebar, she awaited her final curtain call. And on the 16th of April 1958, as Manon Lescaut opened the Dublin Grand Opera Society season at the Gaiety Theatre, with perfect timing, La Sheridan made her final exit. Now, I think here in Ireland we may well stand accused of allowing the memory and achievements of this wonderful artist to fade into all but oblivion. But in Italy, Margarita Sheridan's artistic contribution and status in operatic history is well known and acknowledged, as I found out. At her death in 1958, the then Italian ambassador spoke publicly about this, and he said, "Italy loved and admired her. She was more than a prima donna. She was literally the first great lady of the opera houses of Rome, Milan and Naples, and was Puccini's greatest interpreter." In 1989, I interviewed the eminent opera critic Dr. Giorgio Golazzi, and he said to me, "One cannot speak of Puccini from an international point of view without reference to Margarita Sheridan. In my opinion, in the history of opera, she is one of the greatest interpreters of Puccini's work. Her name is synonymous with the history of Italian lyric opera." Her status in the annals of operatic recording history was established when in 1929 she made the first electrical recording of the complete Madama Butterfly with the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. This and her many other recordings of Puccini in turn influenced a later generation of Italian soprani, including the great Renata Tebaldi, I love dropping names, whom I also interviewed for the book. And she told me, "La Sheridan was a great Puccini singer. In fact, I believe her recording of Manon Lescaut is the most memorable rendition of that role. She is in it a superb singing actress combining great artistry with remarkable technique." And La Tebaldi also told me that it was to Margaret Burke Sheridan's recordings that her teacher trained her in the Puccini operas. So there you go. Now, while the life of Margaret Burke Sheridan, as I said, might read like a Hollywood melodrama, she left behind, I think you will agree, a rich artistic legacy and memories of a lady both exasperating and charismatic. And perhaps the song that most epitomised her own life, and I think nobody can sing it like her, because of what she went through and what the song meant for her, is I Dreamt I Dwelt in Marble Halls from Balf's Bohemian Girl. And I think we'll end with that. And I just, on my own behalf, to thank you very much for being such a terrific audience. If there are any questions you'd like, or there's so much I haven't time to fill in, as you can imagine, but I'll do that after we hear the La Sheridan herself. Thank you.
You